Well, in traditional approaches, the focus is much more on the narrative, meaning on the stories that people tell, and also very often on problem solving. In NARM, we look more at the underlying patterns that somebody had to learn in childhood and how they are preventing the people from being present to themselves, to others in this moment and in their life. Well, it is actually the focus on how have people learned to adapt to the difficulties that life presented to them. How are these patterns now actually causing the problems that they were originally meant to solve? Yeah. And it will give a better understanding of somatic mindfulness, but also on mindful awareness of what we call these organizing principles in one's survival strategies. I think it adds the psychodynamic approach, and it is about the identifications we develop in response to how the people around us meet us as children. And it can be full of shame, or it could be even self-rejection. And this is not so much addressed in the SE training. So this is really a very helpful addition to see how somebody comes to take himself the way he or she is acting right now. In SE, really, we are focusing in depth on what we call the biological completion of incomplete responses to trauma. And we talk about the fight, flight, and freeze response. In NARM, we look more at the emotional completion. And it is really focusing on the primal needs that every person has or every human being has. And if they are unfulfilled, how we adapt and how these adaptive strategy later play out in life in terms of maybe also cutting us off from resources that might be very helpful to have integrated. Identification actually is not so much with the trauma as such, because, well, it depends on how we define trauma. But for example, if I grow up with misattuned parents or caregivers, then I might be neglected with very essential needs, which causes me a lot of distress. And if this continues, a child starts, if the body feels bad, the child starts to come to the conclusion, I am bad. Yeah. And if the misattunement continues, this I am bad leads to me trying to disconnect from these core needs for connection or for attunement or for support. But now I'm not picking up my needs any longer. And I have very less capacity also to self-regulate, and I might feel a lot of shame. And then one identification is the shame-based identification, as we say now. And another identification, because it's very painful to always be there, is what we call the pride-based counter-identification. So, for example, I might feel pride about not needing anybody and not needing any opening up to love. I'm independent. I'm capable of doing everything on my own. That would be then the pride-based identification. But underneath, all of us have this deep longing for belonging and having connection. So the way out of this, the transformation process would be, how can we open the door for reconnecting first to oneself through an attuned other, and from there also connecting with others and the world from a more mature place, less from the old child perspective. There we are actually similar to the SE approach. We track the nonverbal response of the body to what is shared, to what is talked about in the therapeutic or coaching or counseling process. And we point out the positive shifts. So whenever the body starts to relax or starts to open up, that people don't miss that. because it's reassuring when we actually learn to pick it up. We also use it where it starts to constrict, and then we get curious about what's causing the constriction. So the body tells us in which direction are we going, more into more coherence, more connection capacity, more self-regulation capacity, or are we going more into the painful disorganization, dysregulation? So we use it as a guiding principle, and we help also embody capacity for pleasure, but also to embody more capacity for painful aspects, and realizing that we can be present to those as well. Yes, it can to a certain degree, because it is related to an attuned other. So sometimes it's limited what we can do just with ourselves without the attuned other. But to realize my part in the problems I have with a soft eye and an open heart, not with just with, again, blaming myself, it can allow for more option, and it makes me less dependent on my surroundings and how well they are performing. I can stand up more for myself. It helps me to regain my life force and my capacity, and to move out of the cycle of shaming and blaming either others or myself. So it is very helpful to have on board also for these areas.